Hello, welcome to the CashPT Lunch Hour podcast. This is your host, Aaron LeBauer, and today my special guest is Sarah Haran. Sarah is a physical therapist. She's a CrossFit coach. She owns a PT business. She teaches an out-of-network course for ICE, and she has a consulting business, and she does a bunch of other stuff. She's doing some amazing things online, and I said, we need to get her on the podcast and share what she's doing with you guys. And she's a woman, and we're going to talk about how women in PT and women in coaching and women in fitness and business, et cetera, are impacting everybody in your life and all that great stuff today. So Sarah, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Aaron. Really appreciate it.
So I always kind of like to start with like who you are a little bit, and not just who you are, but like, how did you get into PT? How'd you get into doing this? Was there like an event, a story, something that happened where you were like, this is the path for me?
Yeah, kind of interesting. And I think I love hearing these stories from people. So I'll try to keep it short. I never knew I wanted to be a physical therapist until I was in college. I never had physical therapy. I'd been a high-level ballet dancer for a long time. And it was during a time frame where you didn't really send your kids to PT. So and dancers don't tell their instructors or their parents that they're having pain. So right. I never really encountered that. Went to college, had really good grades, and figured, I'll go to medical school. That's what you do. Right? So biology major, all that jazz. Decided that wasn't for me. And my advisor encouraged me to go the exercise science route. Mm-hmm. You know, you're interested in nutrition, you're interested in fitness and kinesiology, all of this stuff. You should do this. My senior year, I was like, well, I guess, am I going to be a PE teacher? Like, what am I going to do with this? My parents were like, are you going to teach ballet? Like, what are you going to do? Because I never played sports, never did anything like that. And I was like, well, obviously I'm going to PT school because that's the next step, right? So, this was in 2004. I started PT school. And at that time, I think it was still, not quite as competitive to get in. So I feel really lucky. I went right into PT school. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's not lucky. I don't know. I was really young in that program and I was very driven. And my mindset was like, I'm going to get this degree and then I'm going to be a PT. And I had no concept of what that meant. I had spent lots of hours at this point volunteering in clinics and getting a feel for it, but I really didn't have any ambitions of starting my own practice or being a leader in the field at all. I think I knew I wanted to help people. I knew that I wanted to work with a dance population. And that was about it. I grew up pretty modestly. And so I thought, be able to like make some money this way. Right. And now that's a pretty funny like side note. So
like I'll go get a good job and it'll be secure and
right. My parents were both teachers and like I said, we lived really modestly. And I actually was like, I'm never gonna be a teacher. Yeah. And now I am.
So, where'd you grow up?
In Washington, near Seattle.
Okay. Awesome.
So, and I went to school at the University of Washington in Seattle and have kind of stayed here. So, and then I went into outpatient physical therapy, kind of like big-ish practice. It was physical therapy owned, but there were 9 clinics in our area and high volume. It wasn't as bad as some of the examples that we hear about. Mm-hmm. We had 45-minute treatment time. So I probably saw like 13 people a day, which is a lot, but it's not unreasonable. Right. And as a new grad, I did get a lot of those reps in, right? And I had good mentorship, and I think it was a fine first job.
It sounds like a pretty good first job from the stories I hear.
Exactly. And I think that that's one of the things that's interesting in cash practice in the Northwest, at least. I don't know if it's that reimbursement is better here, but we still have a little bit of control over what appointments look like in a lot of cases. And so, yeah, I think it was pretty good. Yeah. And I worked there for 7 years.
Wow. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cause I know people who 4 patients an hour. Myself, I saw 43 patients one day as a student. I had
that's nuts.
One of my residents was pressured to like bill a certain number of units, even if his patients were already better. And, that's crazy. So.
Right. So that luckily for me wasn't the case. And we did utilize ancillary staff. So we would hand our patient off to the exercise staff. And that was the piece that was starting to bother me as a more experienced clinician. And I was starting to like hone in on the hip impingement population, which is big for me, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But so I was really specific with what I did or didn't want people doing. And that carryover, like things were just getting lost in translation, right? So at that point I was thinking, I don't think this is the right fit for me, but it wasn't for like negative business reasons necessarily. And still I had no intention of starting my own practice.
Yeah.
So
what was it that like kept pushing your buttons or pushed you forward?
Well, so I went to a smaller clinic then, and I worked there for 2 years. And at this smaller clinic, we had hour-long sessions. I saw even fewer patients. I saw like 7 people a day, and it was great. I had a lot of autonomy, but I had no control over my schedule. And that was the big thing. So both my personal schedule, getting time off, because when I'm out, I'm not making money for the clinic, right? So even if I'm saying like, I'll take unpaid time, it wasn't happening. And then also my patients, like if I have an opening and you put a new patient in there and I don't have another opening for 8 weeks, that is so annoying to me. Like not only do I have other people that I want to take that spot, but I don't have room for this person. And yes, I want to help them, but I'm not taking new patients right now. But that wasn't an option for me because I wasn't I wasn't in an ownership position.
You weren't in control.
So at that was the point. So at this point I'd been practicing 9 years now. And I was like, I guess I'm just going to have to leave the profession. Like, I don't know if this can be any better. And my husband,
why was that so frustrating? Like, tell me about it. Was it your patients would come in and they'd be like, Sarah, I can't get in to see you. And what was it that was so difficult about that?
I'm just such a people pleaser. And I'm a recovering people pleaser. I'm working on that. Right. But it was really hard because I had a really high standard for what I wanted for these patients, and doctors were referring specifically to me for specific things. And I wanted to follow through on that. And it wasn't in my control. And I guess what I've realized is that controlling my practice, even, I was a practice within a practice essentially, but I wasn't being treated that way. So I had this autonomous situation, but it wasn't actually that autonomous. And I think in those 2 years and my clinical practice, I'd been in the field for so long, I was kind of ready. And my husband was like, you're not leaving the field. That's silly. So you're going to start your own business. And I was like,
So was it his idea? Did he float the idea of starting your own business?
Yeah. And I remember him saying like, I'll help you, like, we'll just make it work. And then it was like a ton more work than we realized, right? But it was okay. And interestingly, I was not planning on being cash practice. So that's kind of the interesting twist, is that I was in a different position than a lot of my students or than a lot of the folks that you mentor, because I wasn't burnt out and frustrated by the insurance stuff necessarily. I mean, that was trickling in, but this was like 2015, 16. And I think it's gotten worse, right? So I was more just looking to start my own practice. But what happened is I was not allowed to get in network with Primera.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They had closed their network to new providers. And because I'd been at a little clinic, we had individual contracts, and then so I couldn't get in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's crazy. But it's like you're just trying to open a new business and go in network, and they're like, nope.
Yep. And in Seattle, at least at the time, a lot of the Amazon employees had Primera, and that was like a huge cluster of my patients. And I was not going to be able to take Primera. So I kind of freaked out. I called a woman who is a cash practice owner in Seattle. And she and I chatted for a long time, and I just kept coming back to, I think eventually I would go out of network, but I wasn't planning on that at first. And she was like, just do it now.
Yeah.
So I did.
That's awesome.
So that's really roundabout, but it was not planned. It really now, feels like it was the right decision, but I guess I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah. That's great. So what year was that? 2015?
That was 2016 is when I officially opened.
Okay. And what was it was there anything different? Were there, I guess, like, what was it that helped you get from that point, that decision to just open your business, whether this insurance is going to let you in or not? Like, what were the steps you took that made you successful, or that helped you along the way that you think might, that some of the things that you share and teach through your course, or like, what were those 3 or 4 things that you did that really helped you get to the success part? And I want to ask this because a lot of people have trouble just taking those first few steps.
Yeah.
Because they're either not comfortable, they're too comfortable, there's something else missing, for them.
Yeah.
You kind of know what I'm asking, right?
I think so. Yeah. So selfishly, I wanted to leave the previous clinic because I needed I needed something different for myself. But the real catalyst is that I wanted to do the right thing for my patients.
Mm-hmm.
And I come back to this a lot. Every time I would make it about them and not about me, it was easier to take a step in the right direction. Right? I'm doing this because this is the type of client I want to see. This is how I want to see them. And the only way I can do that is in this model with me as the boss. Right? And it feels really uncomfortable. And it took a lot of practice and a lot of reps to make that feel good and to convince other people that that was the case. Right? But I just had to keep coming back to, no, this isn't me wanting to collect a bunch of money from people. This is me wanting to help the patient the best way that I can.
Yeah. What got you over that mindset of, like, people are paying me a copay to come see me versus now I can actually go and, charge cash, and it's probably not the same fee, right? It's probably copays were probably 50 to $80 at that time, and you're charging 100 or more.
Yeah.
That's a big jump for a lot of people. What was it that helped you?
Absolutely. I mean, and actually I would say copays were closer to 30 to 40 at that time in Seattle, at least. And I started charging 150.
Yeah.
So I think, I do think that experience, at that point I was 9 years in the field and I had quite a big following of patients. And I was very niched down, with kind of 3 main specialties. And I think that helped a lot because I had a reputation with the medical providers, even though they ended up not sending me any patients. Right. Yeah. But I did have a lot of word of mouth recognition. And I already was involved in CrossFit coaching and some of the dance communities, stuff like that. So I think for me, it's a little bit different than some of the folks who are coming right out of school, because I already had that. And I was at a point where it was I had nothing to lose. Right. I wanted to quit my job. So for me, I was well, if this doesn't work out, I'll just go work at Starbucks corporate. I mean, truly.
As a PT or as a barista?
No, as an admin person. Because I thought, I've already given a lot of myself to this profession and to these patients, and I've done a good job. And that's okay if that's the end of this chapter. I think that I didn't feel anymore like I needed to stay in the profession. So maybe it's that distance that I allowed myself that allowed me to rebuild a passion for it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I didn't have to force it.
Yeah.
But that's lucky me. I was or am married and my husband had steady income. And there were lots of factors that played in my favor that aren't always the case for people who want to start going into this route.
Yeah. What do you think, looking back, is there something that you would have done differently getting started?
Yeah, I don't think that I would have opened a brick and mortar space right away. So again, so much has changed in the 3 or 4 years that I've been open that now I see a lot more people having success, starting a practice inside of a gym or inside of a Pilates studio or mobile, right? That I don't think it really exists as much in Seattle anyway. I think that has a lot to do with our, we're so tight space-wise, right? I've been coaching at my gym for 6 years. There's no room for me there. That would be that would be great, but there just isn't the space for me to rent out. And so, I think also I'd been working in big clinics, right? So I was used to I guess as a PT, you work in a clinic.
Right.
And so I leased a space, but that was a lot of money, right? And we had to do some remodeling and it was a big chunk of change. So that was happening at the same time that I learned I couldn't get a contract with Primera. So my world was rocked actually when I learned that I was going to have to be cash based, and then I'm starting this business. So I just had to I think sometimes when you're like, the fire is under you, you have to do it.
Right.
And
right.
I need that sometimes. Like I'm an overthinker. I will like mull things over to the grave. And sometimes you just need that little nudge.
Yeah.
Nudge.
It's like, you got to have your back to the wall a little bit.
I think
right.
so.
You know, I think I encounter a lot of people that they're coming from like a really nice, paying job. They got a lot of money coming from like a home health or skilled nursing, or they've got a really good situation. There's no fire. They're not being boxed in, and they don't have the energy to fight themselves out. There's not really a reason. It sounds like you had a reason, but it wasn't, it was like, I want to do more for my people, but it sounds like you got to this point where I put down a bunch of money for like a brick and mortar clinic, and then found out the insurance wasn't going to let you on the panel, and you're like, oh shit, what next?
Yeah.
Let's do as best as we can and like go 100%. Right.
Exactly. And I have a long history of self-doubt. And I know a lot of people have that, but I have this group of people behind me, family, friends, colleagues, who are always like, no, you got this. Like, we look up to you. And I think I just like really tried to hear that this time because I needed to. I could have like thrown in the towel, but we were going to owe that money anyway. So might as well try. Plus my patients were like, when can we get in? When can we get in? As the build out was happening.
That's awesome.
So
That's
I knew, and it's tricky to share that because I know that isn't the case for everybody. But I also think like for me, that's just how that path went. I think it's okay that I didn't have like dreams of being a business owner, and I've had to like figure it out as I go, because I don't know, maybe it's like more organic that way. I do think that when you try to push it too much, or you're like trying to make it happen and then you're frustrated that it's not, that could be really disheartening, right?
Yeah.
And the illusion is that that's how I did it, but that's not true.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of times the illusion is that something doesn't work. That means I need to stop and I've failed, rather
that's
than,
exactly right.
like I just need to try a new combination.
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, well, I guess we're going out of network now.
Right. What would you say were the, one or two things that you did early on that really helped fuel your growth? And because now you've got another physical therapist or two working with you.
Yeah.
Two of them? That's awesome.
Yeah.
So in just 3 years, you've got 2 PTs. Do you have admin staff or anybody like that?
No.
Okay.
So, and that's kind of interesting because I go back and forth if we need that or not. But right now, a lot of our systems are so automated that I don't feel like we need that.
That's awesome.
I will say we have 2 unpaid volunteers. So we have a university like 2 blocks away from us, and they have an exercise science undergrad program. And so I probably get once a quarter, I'll get an email from somebody asking if we are accepting volunteers. And I only take 1 or 2 of them at a time, but I make them commit to 6 months. And then I teach them how to make the super bills, and they do all my cleaning, and they do all of the scanning and shredding and all of that stuff, because at the end of the day, they're going to get a great review from us. So that's what we do. And that's then awesome. I just gifted them Netter for Christmas.
Yeah. Cool.
But they are happy to be in here because we kind of have like a big open space so they can hear and learn, and they're observing and stuff, but we are getting, admin from them.
Yeah. That's awesome. So what did you do early on that like helped you get to this point where within 4 years you're employing 2 other PTs?
Yeah. So one of the big things that we did, or that I did, is in all my extra time when I wasn't seeing patients, I really just like locked down and wrote blogs and did social media and kind of put myself out there. I really struggled with getting comfortable writing blogs, especially because I didn't know how that would be perceived, or I didn't want to put information out there that other people could judge.
Right.
But you just have to get over that because what I learned is that like the audience that's looking at somebody else's blog isn't necessarily the same audience that's looking at mine. And if I'm not plagiarizing, I'm just explaining something, it happens to be the same topic, that's fine. And so I think like getting content out there was king for me. Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah. I've heard, the same thing for me too. It's just the content, and a lot of people are like, no one reads blogs anymore. Are you still writing a blog, and is it still effective?
Well, it's interesting because, you can do like your Google Analytics for how people find you. And there are 2 blog pieces that are like our biggest drivers of traffic.
That's
One
awesome.
is wrist pain in CrossFitters, which is interesting because I don't actually think I've seen that many people with that exact thing. And one is a hip impingement piece, because that's kind of one of our big specialties, but that drives a lot of people clicking in through our website, which brings our website up. And most of our patients, they come in because we have good ratings on Google.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I would say, yeah, we have word of mouth referrals, but 9 times out of 10, when I ask somebody, if I don't know them from the gym or from a previous like stint of care that we did, they usually say, I just found you on Google.
Yeah, that's so awesome. That's really cool. I'm glad to see that works in other parts of the country too.
Content, and then asking people for reviews. That was a really big key. And I actually learned that from my last employment stint, because we would ask for reviews to help. That was a small practice, and that was something that they had done, and I learned that from them, and it's really valuable and really works. It is uncomfortable. Right? But it's not really that uncomfortable. You just have to practice.
Yeah. What's the best way? Like, what do you say when you want to review? How do you ask?
I usually just, like, if they're discharged or if they're doing well, but we're maybe decreasing their frequency, I'll say, you have been doing so well. I'm so proud of you. I love seeing patients like you. Would you mind writing a review about your experience here? And if you don't mind, go ahead and like insert in there that you're here for CrossFit, because that helps us get more patients that are interested or doing CrossFit. And they're like, okay, cool.
That's awesome.
They love to. And then we also, when patients cancel, or like if they late cancel or no show, sometimes we'll negotiate with them, like, we'll waive this fee, but would you mind writing us a review? And then they're like, oh my gosh, of course.
Oh, that's great. Only if they're like a good patient that, not going to write a bad review.
That's right. We don't have very many bad patients.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because it's not worth their time or energy or money.
Right. 100%. What, so you mentioned some of the things that you guys do, where you're seeing you're a dancer, you guys do CrossFit. Is that like your niche? Is it dancers and CrossFitters, or is it like what you mentioned, treating people with a certain condition? Like
so hip impingement really became a specialty of mine before I even started doing CrossFit. And CrossFit and strength training is what ultimately helped me get out of pain.
Yeah.
So sort of all of those 3 specialties blend together for me, right? Hip impingement, dance rehab, and CrossFit rehab, or functional fitness or strength training, whatever. So those are kind of our big 3. Dan, our newest employee, has an interest in the outdoor athlete. So like rock climbers, mountaineers, but he was a power lifter. So he also has all of that background knowledge. So, but those are kind of the big 3 that we advertise. Yeah.
Awesome. And so with multiple like niches, like, and you've got like this, like, what I imagine is just like the hippie outdoor guy, like rock climbing, canoeing.
But he looks like a power lifter.
He looks like a power lifter because he has a big long beard and big muscles. When I lived on the West Coast, it was just long hair, no man buns, long hair, skinny guys were like the hippie guys, and we did bikes and stuff like that. But anyways, I digress. But you've got multiple, like, it seems like you've got 4 or 5 different kind of specialties. How do you like market all of them, or are you just focused on 1 or 2? How does that work for you guys?
So I would say we have 4. And I've done a lot of thinking about this and wanting to kind of cap it at that. Right? Because I do think there is a tipping point of, do I become a generalist at this point? Are we like a general practice, or do we niche down? Now, being really niched at first was really helpful for me. Because people came because they wanted to be treated for hip impingement. They had failed PT elsewhere, and I was like the go-to hip girl. Over time, though, in cash practice, I realized you don't say no to patients. Like, you do not say no if they want to come see you, because you have to pay your rent. So, like, I think we do have a little bit of that, because if somebody maybe was a CrossFitter and they were seeing us, but then their spouse isn't, They still want to see you though.
Right.
Right. So then it's tricky because we advertise these niches, but I would say half of our patients are hip impingement.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great. Yeah. So hip impingement, is it because, is that like because it's a specific activity that people are doing with your like with dancers and CrossFitters, or is that because that's what you did and people in Seattle, there are enough people in Seattle that know you to come there because they've got the hip impingement problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably both.
Yeah.
So hip impingement is pretty prevalent in those communities.
Mm-hmm.
But because of my personal struggle with it,
Yeah.
I learned what was working and what wasn't working for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I, like, after seeing multiple surgeons and deciding that wasn't the route for me,
Yeah.
really found that surgery wasn't a good option for people because the outcomes were pretty poor.
Mm-hmm.
And I started like stamping around about it,
Yeah.
like talking about it, making a big scene about it. And so then people were like, okay, well, what do we do with these people?
Right.
And I started getting them strength training. And, I had started doing CrossFit, which was really important for me to
Mm-hmm.
build that muscle to support that joint.
Yeah. So what was going on? Like was this before you did CrossFit while you're dancing? Like what was your hip impingement story?
Oh yeah. So that started when I was 17.
Yeah.
And I didn't report it, right? Because I was pretty high level and didn't want to be cut. But yeah, I was having classic hip impingement symptoms. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I was in PT school when we were learning about it that I was like, I have that.
Yeah.
Right. And then when I was a physical therapist, one of the perks of your job is that you can have other people treat you. So people were treating me with core stabilization only.
Right.
And like tractioning my hip and manipulating my lumbar spine. And that's fine. That stuff was okay, but it wasn't what I needed. And in fact, it was like making things worse, lots of stretching of the hip flexors. And again, just kind of yanking on that leg.
Yeah.
And I just was like, I'm going to do something else on my own. So I started working out with a personal trainer, and he got me squatting and deadlifting, which didn't hurt me. And I started to get stronger and stronger. Meanwhile, I had quit ballet and PT school. Mm-hmm. But it took 6 years for me to get pain-free, but I don't have hip pain anymore.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So that's the story that I write about. And then people get excited and they're like, I want to see you. Yeah. But I'm not really doing anything different.
Right.
I'm just talking about it.
Right. Yeah. You're sharing your story, which is connecting to people.
That's right.
Right. I want to point that out, that's really important because a lot of people are afraid to talk about themselves and share their story, and it creates a disconnect. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah. And I think that connection is the number one key in marketing. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So you connect with somebody and then they trust you and you can share with them what you think and then move on.
That's awesome. Are the other people you're working with, other team members, do they have similar stories? Are they writing blog posts and sharing their stuff helping get patients in that way too?
They are sharing their own stories, and they have their own, interests in different body areas. Mm-hmm. But Beth is also a CrossFit coach. So she and I have very similar mindset there. And then I've taught both of them sort of how I want the hip patients to be treated or not. Mm-hmm. I give a lot of autonomy, and that was one of the things that helped me start my own business. Right.
Yeah.
But, I do have certain things like you will not see psoas stretching in my clinic, period. That will be not happening.
That's awesome. That's great. You have I guess the next thing I want to ask is, so a little bit about how your relationship and with the other team members you have. Are they employees? Do they have like a ownership in the business, phantom ownership? How are you able to work that such that you're not stretching the psoas and you're going to kind of start writing blog posts like this? How did you develop that relationship or the compensation for their time and expertise?
Yeah. So when I hired Beth, it was because I was at a tipping point of seeing enough patients that there was some overflow, but I didn't really know what that was going to look like. And I told her that upon interviewing. Mm-hmm. I said, I'm not sure what this is going to, pan out. But here's what I would suggest. Mm-hmm. I can afford to pay you per patient that you see. Yep. And it's hard because I had heard a lot about how you only can demonstrate value to an employee by putting them on salary.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really important, but I was like, well, I can't.
Right.
So I paid her a really high rate, hourly rate, and I pay an admin rate.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't ask you to turn in what you're doing during your admin time. If you're doing notes during that time, I don't care. That's fine, because I want you to have work-life balance. And if that's what that does and that makes you a quality clinician in here, then great, that's fine. It would behoove you to use your admin time to market yourself, right? Or write a blog or whatever. So I don't have we do have goals. We have quarterly or like annual meetings. We're like a review, right? Or even at a staff meeting where I'll kind of say like, these are kind of the goals for this quarter. But I'm not going to hold their feet to the fire. If Beth wants to go to Thailand for 3 weeks, then I want her to do that.
Right.
But I don't offer paid time off. So that's the difference. Like, you can use your time however you want. You can come in, you don't have to come in, because that's what I didn't have.
Right.
And that's what I wanted for myself.
That's awesome. And so are they each responsible for building their own caseload, or are you taking on that role? And how does that work?
So I do want them each to feel like they're a practice within a practice, and that they can grow in their specialties and advertise the way that they want to. But I also want this to be like, patients come to Arrow now. It used to be that they came to Sarah Haran. Right. But I've worked really hard, like combing through the website and changing wording a lot to make sure that it's not just that they're coming to me, but they're coming to Arrow.
Yeah.
And that was a mistake I made, actually, because I didn't know I was going to hire. So on every piece of content, it's like, join me in this,
Instead of join us and we.
Yeah. And then poor Beth would get somebody who was like, well, I guess I'll see you, but I really wanted to see Sarah. She's like, oh, great.
Yeah. If someone calls and they're like, I got to see Sarah, like, how do you handle that? Because I know I get that question a lot.
Yeah. So actually, when Dan hired on, his start date was November 1st this year. I took myself off of the scheduler. And I decided I'm not taking new patients for the remainder of 2019. And of course, like day one, somebody emailed me and they were like, hey, I really wanted to get in, but I'm looking on the scheduler and I can't find your name. What's going on? And so I emailed them back and I said, I'm so glad that you've called. I'm so sorry they're having pain, just my normal spiel. And I said, you're correct. I'm not taking new patients right now, but I highly recommend that you get started with one of these two. And I linked their names and, said, I recommend them equally.
Yeah.
It's really important that we get you in as soon as possible because we want to get you out of pain or back to whatever. And I'm happy to see you down the road.
That's awesome.
And then sometimes they're like, oh, well, I'll just wait till February. And I'm like, all right. Or sometimes they're like, okay, but it's my responsibility as a boss to like highlight my employees, right? And that takes practice too, because it's really easy for people to be like, oh yeah, I am really good at hip impingement. You should come see me. I am the best. No, it's my responsibility to teach them how to help more people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I think people get stuck in that where they're like, well, everyone else is going to have, I'm full. I've got 40 people a week and my employees are only seeing 20 and they can't fill their schedule and I don't have enough time. Right. And it's like your ego getting in the way, right?
That's it. Yeah. And that's on that employer to work on that. Yeah. Because it's not really like, if I'm going to employ them and not make them independent contractors, it is sort of on Arrow and me to get those patients to schedule with them.
Right. Yep. And that's an awesome like distinction of the two different, like it can work both ways where if I employ someone and give them a salary, it's my responsibility to fill their schedule. And then, if they're going to be on kind of a commission basis, basically they have some responsibility, but I still have responsibility to them because I got to keep them happy and working because otherwise I don't have time off.
Absolutely. But I also think that the benefit is that because there's not a salary, there's less guilt when their schedule is lighter.
Right.
If they're not like in here folding towels. Like, you can go for a long run or something.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, I want you to have that work-life balance. And in that free time, if you're just grinding away blogging, that's cool too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you have like a 5-year vision for Aero PT Seattle to grow a certain like distance, size, something like
I
that?
don't know. It's so hard because looking back, like if I said what my 5-year plan was 5 years ago, it was to quit my job and work at Amazon, right? So, and so much has happened in the last 3 or 4 years that I didn't anticipate or expect. In our current space, we have a lease that's another 4 years long. It was a 7-year lease, so maybe 3 years long. We don't really have room for more people. Yeah. So I don't see us growing our practitioner base. What I am interested in is stepping back even further from patient care, so that I can focus more on teaching and helping to develop other clinicians who are interested in business.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you've been doing that for a little bit. I know you've been teaching a course Out of Step, or Out of Network Step by Step with ICE Physio. Yep. How did and you're also doing some private coaching consulting. So how did that come about, and when did you start doing that?
Yeah. So again, wasn't a plan. I met Jeff Moore, the CEO of ICE, the Institute of Clinical Excellence, and he was out in Seattle teaching a course. And we had been in touch a little bit about the fitness athlete courses that they teach, because I had this CrossFit background. So I'd already been talking with those instructors, and he came to visit my clinic, and I was in the midst of hiring Beth at that same time. And so we were talking about that and talking about business. And then he was like, well, I think you should teach a class. And I was like, no, I don't think so. And that conversation just continued until I said yes.
Yeah.
So I am the kind of person that, like I said earlier, I have to be kind of nudged in the right direction. But once I really can get over that and feel like, you know what, I'm doing this for other people, this is about them, and I have good information that I need, they deserve to hear.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. And you've also, it's Full Draw Consulting, which is kind of like the Aero thing, right?
The bow,
do you have like a connection with like the Aero or bow and Aero? Like, what, is there a thing, or is that just something cool?
I have an Aero tattoo that I've had for a really long time. Like before I was interested in this. So I always knew that would be my symbol, but I just couldn't think of a name. And I just kept coming back to Aero. And my mom was like, well, it starts with A, so that's good. Let's just do that. So
awesome.
But Full Draw came from Aero. And that the sort of private consulting again just happened organically, because people would contact me privately, especially people who already had a business running and didn't need the step-by-step of how to do it, but needed like, how do I hire somebody? Right. Or what do I do? How do I have this conversation with somebody who wants to come work with me or whatever? That's awesome. That's kind of what that was about.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So, and we talked a little bit before, and when I was asking like some things about you want to talk about, you mentioned like women's role in the space. And I know like I've discussed this on my podcast a couple of times before with other guests. Like I'm clearly like a guy, so I don't have the ability to speak for women, and but I do have a platform, and so I don't always know the right questions to ask. So maybe can you share with me a little bit about your experience, and what were some of the things that were difficult or easier for you, and where do you see other people struggling, and how might like I don't know, maybe tell me what's the exact question to ask so we can figure it out, because I know like a majority of my coaching clients are women and a majority of PTs are women.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being vulnerable about that, because I think that is the case, and we don't know what we don't know, but it's still important to talk about. And I think that's one of the reasons that I took on the teaching role with ICE, is that I felt like a female needed to be in this space of business consulting. And I think a female who is transparent to say like, hey, I get nervous too. It looks like I have my shit together and I don't, right? Like, and that's okay. And I think that that's really true for males too. And again, like you said, I can't speak for males because I am a woman, but I would assume that is true for a lot of people, Because at the end of the day, physical therapists are here to help other people. We never went into this to make a lot of money. If you did, you picked the wrong profession, right? So we're here to help people, but that can end up meaning that we don't know how to talk about money. We don't know how to value our profession or our skills, right? But the people who really struggle to get over that tend to be women.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of that is cultural. We are still being raised not to kind of ruffle feathers, not to be too outspoken, not to be vulgar, right? And so we're walking this fine line of like, listen to me, and yet like be polite, be put together, all of this stuff, right? Additionally, I personally feel like there's an image of like, well, if you're a smart woman, you also like shouldn't be wearing lipstick or wearing a bikini at the beach or whatever. Like you should be professional.
Right.
Well, I'm both. I have tattoos all over my arm. I have a nose ring. I like makeup. Like I was a dancer. I like that stuff.
Yeah.
Right. But I also am a professional. So why shouldn't my voice be heard? And why am I damaging to that movement of women moving forward in business? Right. I shouldn't be. Right. And so I think more than ever, women are learning like to stop tearing each other down. Right. Especially in this space, like Full Draw has been a great opportunity for me to highlight other practices. Yeah. That's like almost every day I like prop somebody up and say, look at this practice. And a lot of times it's women, because those are the people who follow me and those are the people I follow. Right. And it's important for me to lift them up because just like you said, I have a platform now.
Right. Yeah. That's awesome. Do you think, is there something about physical therapy profession that's difficult for women to navigate business ownership and leadership roles? Because to me, it's like, majority of PTs are women. Historically, profession's been women, and most of the leadership roles are filled by men. And yes, historically, there's a lot of women, but whether it's not leadership roles in the profession, but in business coaching, business consulting, teaching, clinical skills, etc. It's like, I don't know. I feel like it should be disproportionately women.
Yes.
That's my view, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't really know why, other than my personal experience, which was I felt like I didn't want to be judged. Right. So I was uncomfortable putting myself out in front of other people. And I think that that's more common in women.
Yeah.
It's not to say that that's not going to be seen in men. But I do think it's like a little bit more common to not want to put ourselves out there. Additionally, it's less common for us to ask for money. Right. Or maybe we ask for money, but we get turned down, but we don't push it. Right. Because when I would do that, and I've had lots of examples of where I've gone to a superior and said, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I need, and this is what I expect. And I've been blown off, or I've been, like, in so many words, sexually harassed about it. Right. And that just doesn't happen with men. It does, but it doesn't happen at the scale that it happens with women. Right. And so over time, it's learned behavior to be like, fuck it, I'm not going to talk about it anymore.
Yeah. That's, I think what's interesting to me is if you ask you, Aaron, they'll say to me, Aaron, you're the only one or the first person. I was like, no, man, I was just sharing what I did, right? Yeah. I was sharing what I knew. I got a lot of heat for it. A lot of people around me were like, you can't say that, you can't do that, it's not going to work, all this stuff. And I can see where it's totally intimidating, especially if it's happening in other areas of life. But like, I think that what would you say to someone who has knowledge and expertise that they want to share, but they're afraid to because they think someone else is going to cut them down, Yeah.
I mean, I think that you have to ignore that. I think that confidence is key, right? And there's a few things that help with that. I think recognize your strengths and weaknesses, right? We all do that, but we need to like give weight to our strengths. So letting that person really reflect, like, what am I good at? And give that some value, because we always look at the negative and people will point out the negative. So you don't have to do that to yourself. right? You know what the negative is, so remind yourself of the positive. I also talk a lot in my course about fake it till you make it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's something really powerful about that. There's lots of TED Talks out there about that, like our postures can change our brain, can change what we say, right? And I think like that helps us to find our voice, even if we're not confident, but then the reps help us. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So awesome. I would say I faked it until I made it quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I power posed right before I did this interview with you.
Right. That's awesome. Oh yeah. Yeah. We used to, like, in college, it was like, all right, we're going to a party. We don't know anyone. All right, let's just walk in like we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And it was uncomfortable the first few times, and people go, oh, I still got ignored a lot, but it helps. It certainly does. Do you think that there's, I don't know, I guess the last question is, are things changing?
I do think so. Yeah, I do think so. I can only speak to my area, right? Mm-hmm. I live in the Northwest. I live in Seattle, a progressive city. I do wonder, what the lag is in the rest of the country, because there certainly is a lag in other social realms. But I do think it's changing. And I think that technology really does help us, right? Because now I have a network of women who I work with, right? And we support each other and we lift each other up. And I think for women to see other women doing it, that's the biggest thing. Yeah. And now the internet helps with that, right? Because you can see it all.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So, Sarah, is there a question that I did not ask that you think would be helpful for people to know? Or
I think I would just relay the same question to you in general. Like, how do you suggest that people kick their kind of nervousness to the curb? Mm-hmm. How do you get over that self-doubt?
Right. Well, I mean, to me, it's the same thing that you just said, put you into business, is focus on the patients. What do they need? Because it's bigger than ourselves. If there are people out there right now being told to go, the only answer is surgery for their back pain or for their sprained ankle. I mean, I had this patient who had sprained an ankle. They couldn't find anything on the MRI or X-ray, and so they gave him a surgery, and it still hurt. So they gave him a second surgery to clean it out.
What?
And then they were recommending a third surgery. I mean, there are people out there that need us and need to hear that there's an alternative. And if we are in touch with, that's my why, right? And if we're in touch with what our why is and why this is so important, it should transcend the fear of putting ourselves out there and being told we're stupid because we're helping someone.
Yeah. And so my new why is that I want to empower other women, right? So it feels uncomfortable to be like, okay, now I'm going to teach this class because I know everything. I do not, right? But you get outside of my comfort zone and I'm like, okay, I want to help new business owners. And then I further get out of my comfort zone and say, hey, I'm a woman too. I want to help you feel comfortable in this realm.
That's so awesome. That's really cool. So if someone wants to learn more about you, they want to check out, what's it called? Internet stalk your practice, or check out what you're doing with your consulting or your course in ICE. Where do they go to find you online or internet, social media stuff?
So I have Instagram accounts for all of those companies. And the websites are really self-explanatory. But Aero Physical Therapy Seattle, the website is aeroptseattle.com. And our Instagram handle is aeroptseattle. Full Draw is fulldrawconsulting.com. I think the Instagram is just Full Draw. And then Institute of Clinical Excellence is ptonice.com. And they're on Instagram as Ice Physio.
Okay.
ICE.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll put all the links in the show notes, but a lot of times people don't go to the show notes to find it. So
and I do have a course coming up in January. So if people are interested,
So what's the course and what's it all about?
So the course that I teach through the Institute of Clinical Excellence is called Out of Network Step by Step, and it's an 8-week online course. So it's a lot of the how-tos, a lot of the business steps of how to get started, and then we work a lot on mindset as well. We
Awesome.
do, it's kind of self-paced, right? They do it online, but then every weekend we do a conference call where we all come together, we practice different things, we kind of troubleshoot things, practice those conversations,
Right.
all that
That's
stuff.
awesome. And you do that a couple times a year, or is it
Yeah,
available
we did
anytime?
4 this
Mhm.
year, and then we have 2 on the books so far for
Okay.
2020. Yeah,
Awesome. That sounds great. You're doing some really awesome stuff.
thank
And
you.
it's been a while since I've been out to Seattle, but I need to get out to the Northwest again soon.
Yeah,
So,
come on by. Our clinic is right across the street from a brewery, so
oh, really? Oh, awesome. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you spending time with us today and sharing your knowledge and expertise.
absolutely. Thanks for having me, Erin. It was great to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll look forward to meeting you in person.
Yeah.
And well, for the CashPT lunch hour, this is Aaron LeBauer and Sarah Haran. And get out there, share your story, and just do it. And we'll see you on the next show.